Lovely to see you all here. I'm Ali. I'm a mother. I'm a woman working in the creative industries. I have a 2-year-old boy. I'm an MD of a comms agency. I'm busy, I'm tired, but I'm also super energised to be able to talk to you today, Harriet, about some of those issues that Emma raised, and obviously hoping that a little bit of this conversation will help everyone in this audience, which is basically what we're here to do. So we are here to talk about lost talent. And as Emma said, we are a predominantly female industry in the creative industries. And by that we mean PR, communications, advertising. Emma mentioned the 67% female. It's about a 12% to 17% pay gap at the moment. And 1 in 3 people in the creative industries is a parent, which, you know, is a pretty big fact. But less than a quarter of the women have reported going back to full-time work. And of that 24%, only 79% end up leaving full-time work just because it's too much. And that comes down to like childcare issues, not being able to juggle work and obviously the childcare. And obviously the biggest barrier women face in communications when going into kind of senior positions is childcare. So it's no wonder we're here today to talk to Harriet, find out a little bit more about what we can do to kind of help you guys and further your careers. So thank you, Harriet. First thing I want to chat to you about is this kind of pay gaps. So the women leaving the industry, the pay gaps that we're facing in the female-dominated industry. We're on a mission to change that. But what do you think is like the driving force behind people leaving?
Well, thanks very much for inviting me, and well done for setting up PR Mums. And I really agree with the way that Emma put it, is that it's a waste of talent. You know, it's an economic loss as well as a frustration for individuals and an unfairness. So I think that the main issue is about the numbers. I think ultimately, if you get equal numbers, it seems to sort of work properly and the decisions get made right. But the difficulty is if the level that you're at, you're outnumbered. Somehow there's something about the critical mass. It needs to be a critical mass of women. So you don't have to be like pointing things out, that it just organically happens, that the decisions are made in a sensible way. And the difficulty is very much if you're an outlier. You know, you kind of carry it with you and you feel it all the time. Sometimes it shows itself in overcompensating, working 5 times as hard as men, preparing 5 times as hard as men, beating yourself up 5 times as hard as men if you ever make a mistake. But I think that sort of slightly melts away when you've got actual critical numbers, and therefore things like paternity leave, support for childcare start organically working when you've got a critical mass of women, or if you've got a majority of women. And we have got so far to go. A young woman I know has got a job in Germany now, and she's going to work in the public sector, and they pay you 15% more when you've got a child. I mean, it's like, God. And that's in the public sector, and it's like, well, of course. It does cost more if you've got a child. Yeah, it's like, I know.
Yeah, we'll come on to like the shared parental leave and the paternity leave in a sec. And I wondered about the outlier conversation, because I think COVID has changed the way that we're all working. I think that flexibility that it's given us has meant that maybe more women have been able to actually have that flexibility with the childcare and home, but also for men as well. Have you seen there's been a bit of a flex with men kind of having a bit more flexibility with their roles and actually offering women to go back to the workplace?
Yeah, and I think the important thing is that the numbers, again, work out okay, because if you've got a pattern of work which is working from home predominantly with less working in the office or wherever, then, and if that pattern is predominantly women, then it tends to be one which will fall behind and get discriminated against. So in a way, what's important is that the emerging pattern, which needs to be family friendly, needs to be equally populated by men as well as by women. And that's something that I don't know how you're going to address in what you do as PR mums, which is the husbands and partners. Because I think in a way it's about looking to the husbands and partners, it's about looking to each other as mums, and it's also about looking to your employers and the workplace that you're in. But looking to the partners is not one that kind of can be left out, because the truth is that, and you can see this in the General Household Survey, which is the sort of statistical thing, is that the responsibility for looking after young children still disproportionately rests with the mother. And sometimes that is because the man is earning that much more than the woman, and therefore it kind of makes sense for her to go part-time or her to drop her hours. But sometimes it's just a cultural thing. Even when he's earning less, somehow there's the prospect that he's going to be massively more successful, even if he's not actually showing up with it at the time. But so I think that the issue of how you negotiate in the home, as well as how you negotiate at work, and how you support each other to do that. I don't know whether or not we should have some sort of shared audit forms where you actually literally go through and work out who's doing what. Because, we all know what it consists of. When you say childcare, we know what that means. It means everything. It means, working out the childcare. It means working out what happens if the childcare breaks down, or if the child is ill, or if you've got one of those transitions from nursery to reception, then what you do in school holidays, and what you do if the child's ill. And then there's the birthday parties, and there's other children's birthday parties, and there's the holidays, and there's the food to be keeping everybody fed, and everything about managing the home, because mostly it seems that women are the CEO of the home still, running the home, which is kind of weird, really.
Terribly paid job, though.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's interesting because the General Household Survey, there's different answers when you ask men than if you ask women in the same household. So basically, the man's perception and report of what he's doing at home is different from what hers is. And sorry, I just know who I believe on that. But I think that there is cultural change that needs to happen amongst men of this generation. And I think it is beginning to happen. There are what are called male allies. But I think that it's still the default position is still women doing everything. And I think that the demand and expectation from all of you is that if you've got male partners, they should not just not undermine you, which is a start, but not just support you, but actually champion your work, because you're still pioneers, really. And you need that belief and that championing you. So I think a sort of matrimonial duty of husbands is to actually champion what the woman is doing at work, and never be like by default falling back on her to be organising everything in the home, so that he doesn't have in his head all the getting the presents for the other child's birthday party and dealing with all of that.
Completely. And so my husband and I did share parental leave. It's I think he was the first person in his company to ask for it. It's a statutory right that every male has to be able to ask for that. But do you think men are aware of that? Do you think it's a discussion that people in this room could be having with their partners to kind of explore that?
Yeah, and I think you have to recognise the difficulty, which is why it's important to look to employers as well, having talked about looking to each other, looking to the husband and looking to the employer. Because if the father thinks that it's going to be a signal to the company that he's less committed than the others who are not taking parental leave, then he's in jeopardy taking that. And that's why I think, in a way, again, looking to employers, is that it would be good for them to do surveys and report to all employees at how many men are taking parental leave of their employees and how many women are, and then set themselves a target so that they know one of their performance targets is for their men to take parental leave, because that's how you ultimately show you're a really good non-discriminating employer. And it might be you're not helping your women employees, but you're helping somebody else's women employees. And then the barrier might be fear of discrimination, and you can address that, or the barrier might be money, in which case they've got to address that and top up the very, very poor and inadequate state system. So I think, getting in at the early stages, and so they get to be like proficient, is important, because otherwise what happens, as you probably know, is that, you know, the woman gets more and more proficient and does everything quicker and quicker. And if it's then something that's taken up by the man, he does it more slowly, gets it wrong more times, and then it's like not worth her while telling him he's done it wrong, and then he's complaining that he's being nagged, and so it goes on. So I think actually keeping him up to speed is quite an important thing, and I think companies can help with that by the starting off, and also by publishing their flexible work statistics, because if their flexible work is all being done by women, why are the men not doing the flexible work? And they need to then get to be equal flexible working, you know, equal reduced hours, and equal taking up paternity pay. I can see some people looking glazed as if this is completely unrealistic, but that's how you expose what is kind of going on.
Yeah. So one of the points that we find is that people struggle to have that conversation with their employers. So if there's any kind of business owners in the room here today, what would you advise in kind of creating an environment where people can feel safe, you know, open up about fertility treatment they're having, if they are having childcare problems, if they're, you know, going through all different ways of becoming a parent? How can we facilitate conversations more openly that people don't feel so vulnerable?
Well, I think in a way, the work that you're doing here is very important in that, because you're like raising the issue, you're saying it's an issue. You know, perhaps you can ask companies to adopt a protocol about it so that the first time it's raised, like, you know, fertility treatment, it's not by the woman who herself is experiencing it and undergoing it. It's much easier if you're doing something in a normalised context. And I think you can help with that by getting companies to adopt policies on that sort of thing. You know, however undemanding the policy is, if there is a policy on your employees that are going through fertility treatment, it makes the conversation much more easy, because it shows that it's a normal, quite prevalent thing. I mean, the same with menopause policies and such like. I mean, I know we're going to talk about ageism as well, but I mean, you know, honestly, not so long ago, you literally could not mention the word menopause in the House of Commons. I mean, the men would have been having hot flushes. I mean, they absolutely. But now it's kind of more normalised. And when a young Scottish woman MP got up and said, "Oh, sorry, I've just lost my train of thought momentarily. I'm on my period," I nearly fell dead down on the green benches. I never thought the day would happen. But once it's normalised, it's much easier, because you do feel very, very exposed because of what's happening to you, let alone how you negotiate that interface with your employer.
So we're saying start that conversation, be the first, take that kind of bold step with them.
Well, I would say do it collectively to begin with, which is get them to develop the policies, and then develop the policies and then give them, here's one we made earlier, for them to adopt. And then people can work into that policy. And if they aren't the first, they're not the first to raise it.
Yeah, brilliant. Talking about the ageism thing then. So when we hear a lot from our community about ageism, discussing attempts to get back into the workplace on their former career path. The issue we find obviously with women is that there's implications in later life, so like pension gap, for example, when we take kind of bigger breaks from our career. What are the ensuing challenges that will be passed on to kind of government and the economy if this isn't tackled?
Well, I think it's good to recognise that there's a very different chronology for women's career paths and working patterns than there are for men's, because of the issue of actually having children. So I think that the most important thing is not to be apologetic about your age. And if anybody ever says to me, "Oh, I didn't realise you were 73. You look younger," I go, "What's wrong with being 73? Why do I need to look younger?" So I think that we collude in a way with it by wanting to be or look younger. I mean, I actually don't want to be younger. Being younger was quite exhausting for me. Mind you, having said that, I did stay overnight with my daughter last night because she's away working, and I did have the first one getting into my bed at 5:45, wanting to watch Gruffalo. And then the second one woke up and needed her bottle and have to come in the bed and watch Gruffalo. And then the third one also came in to see what was going on. So then I was very relieved to get in the shower and say, "I have to go and work. I'm taking a train to the city." But I think the way to think about it is the problem that we face is there's like kind of 3 ages of women and 3 ages of men. And I think it goes like this, is that when you're a young woman going into a workplace, often you're regarded as a bit distractingly attractive, and that the predominant thought towards you is, am I going to date her? And that kind of gets the wires crossed a bit. And I mean, I found this once with one of my special advisors in government, and she was like, came back speaking to me saying, I just don't feel I'm able to do as good a job for you as I want to, because she's obviously always the only woman in the room as a special advisor in government. And they're all kind of planning to date me and not taking me seriously. Do you think I should, and she used to wear quite short skirts and have long, very swishy, shiny hair. Do you think that I should be dressing differently? Should I be wearing sort of longer skirts? And I felt so conflicted about that, because the truth was they weren't taking her seriously because they were all thinking about dating her. But then I didn't want to be the one to say, cover yourself up. But so when you're younger, you can suffer from being distractingly attractive. Whereas when the man is young, he's like, got his whole future ahead of him, possibly, is going to be a senior figure in the industry. He's in his prime. So then when you get to sort of 30s or wherever, and you having children, and he's having children as well, he's a family man, solid, reassuringly virile. And if especially if he's got 3 or even 4, but she's just got too many children. She's a write-off. So he's in his prime, but she's a write-off. And then when you get to be older, he's like experienced, wised, senior. A bit of the silverback gorilla about him, a bit of the George Clooney, and she's past it. So it's like he's had his prime 3 times and she never has. So I think the most important thing is to own the age you are in and be in your prime at that particular point. So like I'm 73 now, but I am in my prime because I'm insisting on having it, having not realised I was in my prime in those earlier eras.
Yeah. I didn't realise I was getting motivational talk. I mean, come on. And And if there was ever a bunch of women that could change the narrative about, the generation of feeling knackered when we're 30 odd, I think it's us lot. So let's go ahead together and make it a project after. Talking about generational differences, it's quite funny with the Gen Z audience now and the Gen Z generation in our workplaces. Have you heard about the lazy girl working?
Yeah, I was seeing what you were saying about a lazy girl working trend, whereas they embrace balance, valuing family, friends and personal time versus the career is everything attitude of their older colleagues.
Yeah.
But I would say two things about that. I think that the older colleagues might well have really been very concerned about their family responsibilities and all of that. But you were penalised if you showed it. So you looked like you were career is everything, but you really weren't. And therefore, it's important as women, we have insight into those older women and we don't just take them at face value of the face that they actually had to give. So that's just a little plea for a bit of understanding of the trials and tribulations of the older women in the... and also, there was such a penalty, less so hopefully, but there was such a penalty of stepping outside that actually it did feel like you just had to go in that particular thing. But also the issue of embracing balance, valuing family, friends and personal time, it's a really difficult one, that one, because when your work is a very adrenalized thing, it's exciting. You've got out of bed, you've got out of the door, you've travelled to your work, you're with a load of people that you share a project with, and it's very adrenalized and very exciting. And obviously, the family is incredibly important as well. And therefore, it is quite difficult to be saying, I'm going to prioritise one over the other. And the other thing is the sort of speed, the speed of things is that when you're at work, it's snap, snap, snap decisions all the time. You're doing this, you're doing emails, you're doing calls, you're going to things. It's really quick. But then when you're with kids, it's like so slow. It can take you about 20 minutes to walk 100 yards because you've got to walk along the wall and then back along the wall and then stop and look at a dog and then open the snack bag. And it's the speed and stepping out of the speed of work into the just laid back of home is a difficult transition to do. I, having wrestled with this, literally my whole time since I had kids, I often said, right, I'm going to pack it in. It's just impossible. I'm not going to do it. It's just, too exhausting and exposed and terrible. And I'm being terrible in my work and I'm being terrible at home as well. I'm going to pack it in. And then various of my friends would say, oh, you just had a cold. When you've got over your cold, you'll feel a bit better. Don't pack it in. Or there's holidays coming up. But then I remember that holidays are actually more exhausting than work. But when I look back on it, I'm glad I didn't pack it in and I didn't take the sort of mummy track that a lot of my friends of my generation did, because and you can't see it when your kids are your age, but when you're working as a mum, you're showing them the world. I used to think it was absolutely terrible if ever I travelled for work. And once I went to China, and I felt terrible about going to China, quite frankly, the jet lag as well. I mean, I was like, you add the jet lag, all the work, the kids, etc. I felt absolutely terrible. But then I saw my daughter watching TV, and there was something on the TV about China. And she was watching it with absolute fascination, aged about 9, and then wanted to talk to me about it. And I suddenly realised I had taken her out to the world. And you only see, when they're little, you only see what you take away from them. You don't see what you're really bringing into their lives about being somebody who can make things happen and who can do things and can be an agent in your own life. So I am quite glad I didn't take that mummy track. So I hope that these, what are they called?
Lazy girl workers.
Lazy girl workers, but terrible name, isn't it? But I hope these lazy girl workers, are there's no right decision, but I hope they're making the right decision ultimately. And, I think there is no right answer. That's the answer until there's 50% women, and then everything will be organically fine, or even more than 50% women. And if I can at this point mention that there's no equivalence of female domination in a workplace and male domination, because women are the underrepresented pioneering people coming forward, and therefore the critical mass of numbers matters for them. But men are not the undervalued pioneers, and therefore they don't need to have a critical mass of numbers. And therefore, it's not about gender equality, it's about women's equality. So I don't hold with men complaining that they're in a minority. And I would say something about male allies at this point, because I think there is a new generation of men who, in the past in the women's movement, we didn't want men to be anything to do with any organisations or even attending a meeting like this, because they would be like doing all the talking. And we would sit there and nod, and we'd think, God, we'd had a women's meeting and all the men did all the talking. So basically, men were all shut out. And it was also, we've got to tackle sexual offences, we've got to, tackle rape. And so that men were like a sort of hostile, threatening out group, and therefore we excluded them. But with the change, that's, in the 70s, going back a long way. But now that there are potentially a lot of male allies, there are men who have been brought up by feminists, who agree with feminism, who want women to be equal. And I think they need to be sort of embraced into the women's movement, but on certain conditions, because I think that they need to step up, but they shouldn't step in front. So, and they shouldn't even really step alongside. They should be one step behind, because women need to have the leadership of their own progress and their own change. So I think there is a real role for male allies, and we should identify people as male allies or not. We identify ourselves as feminists or not. We should identify men as male allies or not, and they should be proud to be male allies and identify themselves. And that's something the Fawcett Society, which I chair, is kind of encouraging the notion of male allies. Somebody joked that it would be great for them to put it on Tinder, I'm a male ally. I don't know anything about that. Yeah, exactly.
So it's great if you've got a male ally within your workplace, but what about those kind of male-dominated workplaces that people or women struggle to kind of feel heard and feel seen, and maybe they're getting, overlooked for promotions, they're getting overlooked for opportunities to kind of push themselves. Do you have any advice about anything you've overcome in that kind of situation, or anything, advice for women out there that might be feeling that right now?
Well, I think it's very important, the sort of discussions that you're raising, so that you cannot think it's about you, that you've got the context and you don't feel that somehow you're causing a problem. And the truth is, in a male-dominated workplace, women, unless there is a specific policy or an intention of the men to actually bring forward women into equal numbers, women will be being overlooked. That is just a fact. That is the state of affairs that there will be. And therefore, the point is, I think, not to internalise it, but to recognise you're part of a movement for change, which is not only going to, improve GDP, improve the finances of your actual company that you're working in, the industry, because, the loss of talent is a massive thing, and it's a people-powered industry that you're in, a very successful one, and it needs to be modernising and looking to the future. And women are part of that, that appeal to modernity, really.
Yeah, brilliant. Bit of real talk. How do you think the current government is failing women?
Well, I think that I'm very worried about the kind of war on woke. The idea that that somehow women are just have learned moaning victimhood, and that actually women are equal now, and all they need to do is recognise that they shouldn't be just complaining. And I think that is very dangerous, because the truth is there's quite a backlash. There's a misogynistic backlash. Whenever there is women making advances, there is always a backlash. And actually, they should be speaking out against that backlash. The cultural conversation that the government leads is very important indeed. Incidentally, it's very interesting, have you seen on GB News about that presenter saying about another presenter in a different channel about, who'd want to shag her? I mean,
let's not give them the airtime.
Yeah, well, I've forgotten all their names anyway. But that sort of thing, we should recognise that is not just a one-off weird episode. That is misogyny, of which there is a lot of cultural acceptance of it, and it should not be acceptable. It's not laddism, it's not just bants, it's actually oppressive of women and discriminatory against women. And the thing is that it always applies. It would not apply to any of you if you would only just shut up and stay at home. But if you actually go out and be authoritative and speak and be good at what you do, God help you, because actually you've got to be shut up and put in your place. That's what it's about. It's about putting women in their place by making them feel uncomfortable. And I mean, I had loads of, I remember one time, I think it was even in, a sort of progressive newspaper that this columnist had put, who'd want to shag her? But that was just one of those sorts of things. And I think the government doesn't provide the right cultural leadership and doesn't recognise that you need government action to change things. So, for example, you need affordable childcare. You need to have pay in the public sector like Germany with the 15% extra for having children. You need proper working social care, because women, when they get a little bit older than you are, will then be having the responsibility for caring for older relatives as well. So you need social care, and you need the government determined to drive change in the pay gap. We've got the figures now on the transparency of the pay gap. So you can see it company by company, you can see it sector by sector. What the government should do is give the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is the regulator, the power to set targets for particular companies and for particular sectors, and say, if you don't meet those targets, then we'll fine you. That's what they do with, sewage. If there's an outlet of sewage, then they get fined. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission is the only regulator that doesn't seem to have any enforcement powers for sectors. It can help individuals bring cases, but it needs to have sectoral powers to set targets and enforce them.
Okay. I have one more question, and we're probably going to take some questions from the floor. Do you think the Labour Party is doing enough to bring women into the party? You've been obviously very pivotal in that kind of movement, and maybe politics in general.
Well, I think that one of the reasons why the Labour Party was my political home was because it felt like that it was the political wing of the women's movement. And if you were in the women's movement and you wanted to see women getting equality at home, at work, in public services, in all the different professions, the place that you went to would be the party that was for progressive change, rather than the Conservative Party, which was about the small c Conservative, about not making that progressive change, which is often very controversial and quite difficult. So when I started out, there was a strong sort of predominance in the Conservative Party of the idea that the role of the woman was to be supportive of the man in his family, look after his children, be a housewife for him, and that men were the leaders, and that was family values. And therefore, the women's movement was considered very much as a threat to family values because it was undermining the head of the family. It was considered very subversive. But the Labour Party felt like, although it had bags of its own problems of, male dominations, absolutely bags of those problems, it felt like the place to be the place in politics where you made your political home. I remember once I did a thing which caused absolute outrage and controversy, which was look at the number of men MPs and the number of women MPs region by region and rank the regions according to how many women MPs they didn't have. Anyway, the North came out very badly and the men in the North were absolutely furious. And I said, the male Northern MPs, and I said, well, we need more women MPs. And this guy said, there aren't any women in the North. And, it took me a little while to work out what he meant. And that change is felt to be quite threatening. So we've had our arguments within the Labour Party, and we still continue to have our arguments because we haven't reached, the perfect state of equality, but that's why it felt like to be my political home and always has been.
Brilliant. Well, Harriet, thank you so much. Loads to take away from this. Have conversations with your employers, get the policies in place. Lots that we can help out with there as well, isn't there? I think, thank you so much for your honesty. I've taken a bit more airtime than I probably should have done, looking at the time. Should we get some questions from the floor? Well, we have some. You can just stand up and talk. we won't all look at you.
I wanted to ask about women moving jobs while they have children, because I've been told quite a few times you need to choose flexibility or pay. And I wondered if you had a few words of wisdom for women who want to maybe move jobs while they have small children, or children in general.
I think that it can be quite a disincentive to move, can't it? It can be like stay where you are because you've at least got your foothold there. But if in your industry, moving from job to job is the way that you get to be able to be further on in your career, then that is to be like just the person who stays because you don't want to be getting out there and moving jobs and negotiating all of those things. I think it's quite difficult, but I think that, there are ways to do it and there are, conversations to be had. I think the answer probably lies with your colleagues here rather than with me on that. But I think the idea of how you sort things when you're changing jobs and how you don't just get stuck and marooned in one place is a really, really important one. So I think it's back to work is an issue. Progressing within your work is an issue, but having that ability to change employers when your kids are young or, just generally when they're being kids is a really important one. So I think it's a really important question, but I don't immediately know the answer, but Emma and Ali will circulate the answer on WhatsApp.
Oh, yeah, has everyone done the poll?
When you, after you had your children and you returned to the workplace, did you feel that it had impacted your confidence? And if so, how did you overcome that?
Well, I was pregnant when I first got elected, which was absolutely mad, really. And because it meant I was trying to be... what happened was I thought I got selected for a Labour constituency, and then I thought that my baby would already be born, and then I would have got myself sorted out when the time of the next general election came. But sadly, the man that I was replacing died, so there was a by-election. So I was pregnant during the by-election, and I could see everybody thinking, oh, she can't do a by-election when she's pregnant. But it was that point in the women's movement in London where nobody actually would say that. So I could know they were thinking at it, but they didn't say it. Unfortunately, my husband said, of course they're not thinking it. You go right ahead. So I already felt very out of place when I arrived and was in a sort of dark red velvet maternity dress, and all the men there were in grey suits. I mean, it was 97% men. So you can imagine being a woman and being a pregnant woman, you immediately feel that you're in the wrong place, and that you don't fit in. And I absolutely didn't fit in, but there was lots of women's support that I had outside who were saying, get in there, change it all, do everything. So it did, all the way through, it was a challenge to my confidence, all the way through, until now, really, where I've kind of sort of, I'm what they say on Love Island, backing myself. I am absolutely backing myself now, but I didn't earlier on. And it's funny because I went to a dinner the other night of some colleagues of mine who were MPs back in the day, in the 1980s, and they were men, and they were older than me. And I immediately was back to how I felt then. And they were suddenly, my brain drained of any knowledge of anything. And I struggled and thought, God, what am I going to be able to say? They're all talking about, you know, social history and political theory and everything like that, and being very authoritative. And I thought, dear God, you know, this is like 40 years later, and still I'm back in that place where my confidence has drained away, and I can't think what I've got to contribute, which is mad, really, because I obviously did have stuff to contribute, but it's about feeling like an outlier, and it's very, very demanding on your confidence, especially if you make a mistake. And we all make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but the resilience that you need to have to cope with your own mistakes and to know that everybody makes them when you're in that sort of feeling exposed situation is a worry. And you also, I think, feel exposed and lack of confidence in your motherhood role, because, you know, those are my friends who worked part-time, very few hours, and more or less stepped off the career track. I used to think, oh my God, I bet their children are so much happier than mine. Everything must be marvellous in their household. I'm ruining my children. And I got plenty of letters from people saying, you are ruining your children. Literally, people would say, what are you doing? You know, it's absolutely terrible. So I think you have to battle with your confidence on both fronts. So that is a challenge. But that's why I think groups working together as women in the same situation is absolutely critical. If you haven't got the critical mass of you all, if you're not one workplace here, you can be like a virtual workplace support mechanism for each other. Because here, you're all in the same boat. At work, you might well not be, especially if you're at a senior level.
Love that. Yeah.
Affordable childcare, you mentioned it earlier. So I earn a good salary, I pay half of it away in my taxes. I then pay for my nanny and pay again more tax for the privilege of having a nanny so I can work. The economics of that just about work for me, but I think for a lot of people it doesn't. There have been conversations in the past about kind of tax breaks on childcare. What can we collectively do to drive that forward faster? Because that to me feels like a critical thing to get more, to make it possible for the economics for more women to work.
Yeah.
Well, it is, you know, it is a major issue which is set in perception against the women's work, because if you weren't going out to work, there wouldn't be all these childcare costs, and therefore you're only working to pay the childcare and for some future situation for yourself. So, I mean, I think that in a way, you know, the country, every public service, every bit of the private sector depends on women working as well as men. It simply does. If women didn't work, the lights would be off and everything would be closed down. And most of those women are somebody's mother. And yet there is not the proper economic infrastructure, which is what childcare is. And really, you know we need, for future generations, we need every child to be educated, and therefore it's a public policy imperative. But I think childcare is free, universal, high quality, childcare is a public policy imperative because women are needed to work and they're not going to be not able to stay at home. Doesn't cope with the travelling, doesn't cope with the extra hours and such like. But I think at the very least there ought to, the demand ought to be universal childcare, which is free and high quality. And in a lot of other European countries, that's what they do. They do have. I once was wheeling a buggy with the kids when they were little, and this French woman came up to me and she said, "Oh, where is the crèche?" And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "You moved into the area." And she was wanting to find out where the free childcare was. And I was like, "Oh God, sorry, it's England." So it's like, there isn't one. She was, so it's not impossible that we should have that, aside from us all moving to Sweden,
Everything's better in Sweden.
But anyway, we've got Rachel Reeves, who is our Shadow Chancellor. I don't know whether you've, seen her, but she's a proper feminist as well as a proper economist. And I think I literally thought I would be dead before we actually got the first woman Chancellor. And I hope that, she will be the first woman Chancellor. And I think that what she will bring to her economics is an understanding of the sort of economics that you've talked about in your household.
Yeah, over there.
How have you dealt with, we're a group of women, but it's different.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
How have you dealt with the one woman represents all women? If you look at Diane Abbott, she made a mistake. Well, women make mistakes, we're not going to hire them in. And I've experienced that in my career. We've worked on something and they've thought, well, let's just pass it by a woman. She'll give it the green light. And then I'm representing all women. How have you found you can even build a group of women when a lot of people have the sight that one woman is enough? That's it.
Well, I think that's a very, very good question. And really, the answer is that you need a critical mass of women, and one woman can never represent all women because women are diverse in many different ways: age, gender, sexual orientation, where they live. And therefore, it's sometimes, in a well-meaning way, a male system might pick on a woman and that's tick the box. And that is not the right way to be doing things. They need to be looking at the overall numbers. But often women will look to a woman they see. And again, it's quite difficult to be like saying, well, actually, it's one of the things that I always think about role models and mentoring, is because I think in a way that you need to look to yourself and look to each other, not look up at somebody as if they're a role model. Because when you're in a system of wanting progressive change, the role model is a conservative one, because it means you step in the footsteps of somebody who's done it. And I don't want anybody to step in my footsteps. I want them to be doing much, much better in terms of how things all fit together. So I think that the idea that a woman can represent all women or can mentor younger women, I'm just wanting to give younger women support, but not to mentor them, because you are in your own context now. So I think the short answer to that is that it's got to be an explanation that this is a structural thing. It's not an individual thing where you have a woman leader who solves the problem. It's basically, and women have got to be inclusive of other women and work together with other women, and not think just because they're in the room that it's okay.
Cool. We've probably got one more at the back.
So I'll just stand up and right at the back. Because I've got a quick observation.
Yeah.
That's right. So the observation is, I have a lot of male feminist friends, which is great, and they have, in support of the sisterhood, a lot of them have taken shared range views, which is also great. But the problem I've observed is, and this is just my observation, so it may not be true across the country, almost to a man, they have taken shared parental leave at the same time as a woman,
when the baby's a bit older, like 6 to 9 months. And very often they just take a nice holiday. And so they never experience being the primary carer, they're always sharing it. So the woman continues to do all the cooking, all the cleaning, all the childcare. And the man just calls himself a good feminist and has a lovely holiday. So my kind of plea to your colleagues when you're talking about policies for the next election is to make sure the policies for equality are designed to create the kind of behaviour change we want to see, which is men getting much more stuck into childcare and women having more flexibility at work. And then my question, which will hopefully give us a lot of hope, is with any luck, Labour will be in the next election. I'd like to find out a bit more about the kind of future we think you can expect once Labour's in power, what your kind of key policies may well be. Appreciate you haven't written a manifesto yet, but a bit more about the future and what we can hopefully work towards in the years to come.
Well, I think your observation about how policies work out in practice is a very important one. We have to be clear-eyed about this. It doesn't mean that the policy isn't very important, but it also does mean that the cultural drag, the cultural baggage is still there. In fact, I remember when we were, I was just pushing for maternity leave, pushing for doubling maternity leave and pay, and pushing for the introduction of paternity leave, which there wasn't any when I was first in government, and parental leave and paternity pay. We had an international sort of mini conference, and one person came along from Norway and said that they had done some research which showed that that men's taking of their parental leave coincides with the elk hunting season. So it's like, oh my word. Whereupon somebody piped up, somebody else piped up that actually it really surged during the World Cup. So, I mean, those are a bit grisly anecdotes, but these things take really time to work into a proper sort of equal situation. And there's also the expectation of the mother-in-law, because the mother-in-law is an older generation and might be thinking that your role is to support the husband and father rather than him to be supporting you. I mean, that is a bit of a caricature, but I know there's a little bit of that around. But the issue for the future Labour Party policy, I mean, what you could do is you could have somebody from the Labour Party and somebody from each of the other parties to sit up here and then to tell you what they're going to do when it comes to the manifesto and the general election, which is going to enable you to do your work, which then is important for you and your family, but important for the economy as a whole as well. So just get them in and put them on the spot. It's not very far to come, just a couple of stops on the Jubilee line from Westminster. And then I would suggest that you do that, because now is the time when the commitments are all being thought through and being made.
Brilliant. I think we've got an event series planned out. Thank you so much, Harriet, and thanks for your questions, everyone. And that was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.